Greetings, trainers. We are just 1 week away from Sword and Shield, but in the meantime, welcome to Soundproof. My name is Brendan Lewis. I go by Mr. BDog46 on the internet, and I am joined, as always, by Jake Muller. Of course, he goes by Major Bowman on the internet, and we're here with episode 10 of Soundproof. I hate to break it to you, but we've got a little bit more Ultra series that we're going to keep on chugging through here before you all dive into your... Well, I'm leak-proof. I don't know, or leak-free, spoiler-free. I don't know about you guys, but
I am too. Actually, I've somehow stayed safe.
Good on you, Twitter. Good on you. I mean, maybe you just haven't gone on Twitter, but I've been on Twitter, and leaks have been relatively so. So thank you, Pokemon community. If you're listening to this and you haven't posted spoilers, thank you. But we are here in episode 10 as we're finishing strong here in the Ultra series. We've got a couple of majors that took place since our last episode, and as always, we will kind of shoot through the ladder. We're going to avoid locals, I believe, this week, Jake, for the sake of time and for the sake of kind of like spotty reporting and availability of results. So let's just say that from now on, if you want your local featured on our show, you have to tweet it at us. You do a little bit of work, we'll put you on the show.
Like that.
Okay?
We get some engagement on Twitter.
I love engagement.
I'm down with that.
All my friends are getting engaged.
Oh.
So we are on dash 10 here this week, which we have a good slate, one that I'm particularly excited about that's about a week late as far as its, seasonal relevance. But one of Jake's favorites is also featured heavily this week. So good slate for us here. I think he's alluded to it multiple times. But starting off as we continue through the first kind of row of Kanto Pokemon here is, of course, Caterpie.
Caterpie, yeah. A lot of my associations with Pokemon that aren't competitively relevant are from the anime. And I just remember Misty being absolutely terrified of a Caterpie in one of the very early episodes.
Misty was really mean to Caterpie.
Misty's mean to most people, wasn't she?
Well, I think in the anime she was always kind of mean, and then they kind of when they brought her back. Well, in the first episodes, couple seasons of the anime, I don't know if I said that, but then when they brought her back, they were like, "Look, she's nice now, and she has a Mega Gyarados." But she hated the bugs and everything, and then poor Caterpie, when it went through its 3-stage evolution arc in 10 minutes on the show, which was fun. But number 110, the moment we've all been waiting for, is Weezing.
Yay! I love Weezing. I don't really know why. I
don't really know why either.
Well, it's because I love James.
Okay,
James is my favorite character in the show, and that was his first signature Pokemon was that Weezing. And also I love the color purple. And also, I can relate to coughing and wheezing because I'm sick all the time, and so I can appreciate the wordplay there.
Because you're filled with hot air?
That too, yeah. I emit a lot of smoke. I'm bad for the environment. I have a second head growing off my left side. It's just all these things that I can relate to wheezing. Yeah, I know. No, only I do, and that's why I love wheezing.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
I don't know.
I won't talk about my second head then today.
It's also just an old mon that I've it's always been around, and it's always been, somewhat present in some tiers and some competitive formats. So, it's cool. I like Weezing a lot.
Yeah, it's a cool Pokemon. Absolutely zero relevance competitively. But Jake, I'm going to give you the floor to talk about Galarian Weezing if you want to talk about it real quick.
I'm
kind of surprised you didn't dive right into it here, but go ahead.
Well, I mean, okay. If you don't like Galarian Weezing, I need you to block me on all forms of social media immediately because I do not want you in my life. And also, the colors are great. Black and that kind of lime greenish look amazing together. And also, it's literally beating climate change. Hello. What else do we need from a Pokemon? It's purifying the air. Boomers are quaking in the sight of Galarian Weezing.
Yeah, I think Galarian Weezing is cool. It was kind of interesting, as far as what's been revealed so far, and again, we're spoiler-free here, that they kind of forced a fairy typing onto Weezing, and then all these other things that feel like they should be fairies, like Galarian Ponyta, are not.
But poison fairies, a unique typing, and we certainly take those.
The ability's neat too. Anyway, that's enough time about. This is the Weezing episode this week.
There we go.
But 210, of course, is Granbull, and we kind of discussed sort of the forgettability of Snubbull, I believe during our last episode. And Granbull is arguably even more forgettable than Stubble is.
It's kind of funny because in Pokemon Go, the like PvP format I'm playing right now, charm users are really good.
Yeah.
And Granbull is one of 2 like actually relevant charm users in the format, but it's like so much worse than Ninetales, Alolan Ninetales, that like Granbull itself is like the second best at something and still entirely forgettable. So
yeah,
it's like I don't really know what else you can give it to try to help it out.
even aside from competitively, just like the design is forgettable, and I felt this way about Beartic, where it's just like it's like a bear, okay, and it has icicles on its face, and that's it. And it's like there's no other like notable design features. It's just like Granbull is like a dog, and it has a big underbite.
Yeah,
and that's
same.
it. Like there's like the whole bottom half. Like if you cut it off at the head, there's just literally no design.
Yeah, that's true. They just took a dog and made it stand up.
It's just a dog. It's pink dog.
Speaking of dogs, though, we have a Manectric.
Speaking of dog, we have an actually good dog. Manectric is actually one of my favorites.
Okay.
Which is interesting and in the sense that it would not be what one might consider to be my aesthetic. As far as Pokemon go, I'm like a lot into the cute and the goofy things, and Manectric is just like cool, sleek dog thing. But I was a big, obviously, Hoenn fanboy, and the one thing I always remember about Manectric is that, like when I was playing through Ruby, it learns a whole bunch of cool moves. So if you have like an Electrike or a Manectric, you can just eat it into the cool contest, and you have like no way of losing.
That's how Skarmory was too, actually. I remember.
Yep.
If you, like, especially if you kept the Steel Wing TM from the cave in Dewford and you taught it. Yeah, that's funny.
So that's what I remember. And Manectric was also on the first ever VGC team that I brought to a regional in 2015. So
it was actually
it has a special place in my heart.
I went to one regional in 2013, but in 2014, the first 2 I went to had Mega Manectric too. So it was on my second team. So
he's a good dog.
Yeah,
he's a good dog. 410 is Shieldon, which really means nothing for me. I think we did Rampardos last week, and then what's the other one? Cranidos the week before. Yeah. I really just feel nothing towards the fossils in this generation.
See, this might be a hot take, but I think the Gen 4 fossils are some of the best.
Interesting.
Because I love, like, I talked about Rampardos last week. It's really cool. And I honestly, I think Bastiodon is a really cool design. Like, it's literally just a wall. Like, it's an actual wall that walks.
It is a walking wall.
Yeah, and Shieldon looks cool too. Like, say what?
Bastiodon's good in Go.
It's it's one of the best PvP Pokemon in Go, which is strange to me, but that's, what's happening, I guess.
Yeah, because it's not good in anything else.
No, yeah. But I don't know. I think I'm talking aesthetically, obviously not competitively, but I think they look really cool.
I have to think of what. I think Archeops is really cool. I'm trying to think of what the other fossils are. Were there Gen 6 fossils?
Yeah, Amora and.
Oh, I like that. Yeah. Auroras and what's the other one?
Tyrantrum. That's I'll give you that.
Those are both really
cool. Those are
actually.
I think those are actually better.
That's a good
Gen
generation.
4 might be second then.
Okay. I will have to think about that. Anyway, 510 this week is Liepard.
And 610
is yeah, really. Liepard is just kind of like infamous in my mind now because I swear I always thought it had a normal typing.
Nope. Silly Brendan.
Anyway,
yeah, I have nothing else to add about Liepard. It's boring.
610 is Axew, which is I think it's a cool Pokemon. I think that line is actually kind of neat. I was reading somewhere recently something about how Haxorus was designed by like a female game designer, which is like something that's a little unconventional over in Japan at the time, I guess. And then they kind of like designed the evolutionary line in reverse. So it like somebody designed Haxorus and then they like went back and designed Fracture and Axew, which I thought was kind of cool.
I like that Axew is like adorable and then it evolves into this like badass monster Haxorus.
Monster thing. In the anime,
Axew, I was about to say that it's also really, really cute in the anime.
It uses Dragon Sneeze. And then the last one, which was the one I was most excited to talk about this week. Again, we're about a week late for it, but it is Pumpkaboo, which is actually one of my favorites. I think it's adorable, all the way down to the like cute little cry that it has, which is just like perfectly fitting for it. I don't care for Gorgeist, but Pumpkaboo is really cute. Really cute.
I think they are cute. But like both of the Grass Ghost families from Gen 6 are really good. Like I think we already did.
Yeah,
Trevenant,
we did.
But
right.
yeah,
I think they're both good,
like
but I think
both,
that Pumpkaboo is like easily the best of the 4.
Fair enough. I'll give you that.
Sure. Thank you. You let me have that one. All right, so that's it
brings
for this
us to the ladder this week. We're gonna zoom right through it because
okay,
a lot of this we've seen before. Do you say okay, Zoomer? Is that what you just said?
Yes.
This is I can't work like this. Hostile working environment or whatever you call it these days.
I never claimed that it wasn't. Anyway, first on the ladder this week is the latest iteration of Kangtorn, which has Tapu Koko and Incineroar in addition to Xerneas Groudon. This is one that I saw a little bit at like before Amoonguss was kind of like slapped in as the staple last mon, but I think Coco's a cool addition there.
Didn't Ashton use this at NAIC?
No, he had
or was it
Metagross? Yeah.
Okay, you're right.
I think he had Metagross over Kangaskhan, but the same other 5, yeah. Because it's the GOA Coco. I don't know if it is on this team, but Ashton had the GOA Coco.
Mm-hmm.
At 2 on the ladder is Zerndon, Salamence, Tapu Fini, Incineroar, and Amoonguss. And at this point in Ultra Series, we all know what that does.
Right.
So a little bit more interesting on the ladder, and I was talking to Jake briefly about this. The team is Rayquaza, Palkia, Tapu Koko, Tapu Lele, Incineroar, Stakataka. And I have played this like multiple times on the ladder. And every time I see it, I just don't think Trick Room Palkia. So then it's like Palkia, and then they like switch in Stakataka, and then with Rayquaza in the back, like it's really hard to beat.
Sounds like you're just bad.
If you allow Trick Room to go up, really spooky. I never again have not claimed to not be bad, so let's just keep all of our let's keep everything in mind here.
It's not much fun to burn you when you just turn around and say, "Well, yeah, you're right."
Do you want me to be more offended?
Yes.
I'll try harder next time. Okay. At 4 on the ladder is Spain Rain, and Jake actually just wrote that in on our.
I couldn't be bothered to type out those mons again. I've done it so many times over the last month or so.
Again,
if you need a refresher, it's Kyogre, Koko, Incineroar, Kartana, Nihilego.
And again, I think we've said it, but it's effectively the defining Kyogre team of the format at this point. At 5, speaking of Kyogre, is Tapu Koko, Incineroar, Crobat, and Ferrothorn. I mean, fine. The thing that always gets me about Crobat and Ferrothorn is they've always felt like the laziest Zern checks to me, and like don't always function as well as they should. But you know, people have had success, especially with Crobat recently, which is now like a standard mon on Xerneas Lunala.
Oh, that makes sense.
Next team on the ladder is Groudon, Lunala, Salamence, Tapu Fini, Incineroar, and Bisharp. And that's something I've actually seen quite a bit of, and it's just kind of like, you know, that team, and you choose, you know, where you want to have your Yveltal counter. And, you know, Bisharp does that as well as anybody. You can switch it into Snarls. It still takes kind of a lot of damage from foul play, especially if you give it a boost, but it's, you know, obviously checks Yveltal pretty well.
Yeah, I don't hate it. Like, I think the theme, especially in the early episodes of this podcast, was playing is this Yveltal matchup with Lunadon teams. So, yeah, Fini and Bisharp both kind of do the same things. Not same things, but they both kind of fill that role.
In the sense that they check Yveltal, yeah.
Right, yeah.
Yep. Next team on the ladder, Groudon, Yveltal, Metagross, Tapu Koko, Incineroar, and Mimikyu, which is something we've seen quite a bit of since it topped Forward Worlds. Every time I play this team, they lead Tapu Koko and Metagross and double into a Groudon slot. And then if you quick protect, you win.
Good to know.
I've like had that happen like so many times where like the answer to Groudon on that team is either to like win a Groudon speed tie or you lead Metagross, Tapu Koko and try and catch the double target on turn 1. That's all it does.
Does Tantrum even do half?
Well, it's GOA Koko. That's how they get you. Yeah.
I see.
So they GOA and if you catch that, then you win the game.
Yeah.
Next team on the ladder, Groudon, Necrozma, Dawnwing, Salamence, Tapu Lele, Incineroar, and Stakataka. And I feel like we're kind of at the point in the format, and maybe it's because we're in the dying days, but it seems like Necrozma is like on the rise at this point.
Yeah, I mean, we'll cover that when we talk about Richmond.
Richmond, yep.
Yeah, but Necrozma seems like it's kind of coming back. Like this is essentially the Tommy team with Incineroar instead of Smeargle.
Right.
Which is probably a fair swap if you wanted to adjust that team a little bit, but I don't know. It feels like there wasn't really a great reason that it kind of fell off. Like Tommy won a regional with it, and I think Yuri like won or got second or something. He did well with it right after that.
And obviously got second at Worlds.
Oh yeah, right.
Yep. So yeah, no, I agree with you that there wasn't necessarily. I mean, I think we had a pretty in-depth discussion with Tommy about what its good and bad matchups were, and it got to a point where people were teching for it. So I guess maybe that's the reason that it started to show back up, but it's hard to find answers to it. Like, Incineroar being the main answer to like sitting in front of Tapu Lele and Dawn Wings, and even then, people have been teching to knock out Incineroar, be it a Selgor or like Tommy was using Helping Hand Smeargle. Yeah. All these ways that you can kind of like boost the
Nature's Madness Lele too helps.
Yep, definitely. So yeah, Necrozma again in the next team, except it is Duskmane alongside Groudon, Salamence, Tapu Fini, Incineroar, and Porygon 2. Because
as opposed to Porygon 3?
As opposed to Porygon 5.
Yeah, I mean, one of the first times we've seen P2 this year, I think, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, we've seen it a couple times on ladder, and every time kind of like scratched our heads while we read it off the sheet. I mean, it's just kind of like you put Recover Trick Room, and then you get to choose 2 attacks is like effectively what it does. So
right.
I mean, I guess you get access to like Foul Play, Shadow Ball, Ice Beam, Thunderbolt.
Toxic even.
Yeah, any sort of like it has all this coverage that you can use to hit certain things, but it's not really like if you want to put Foul Play on there to hit Lunala, like I wonder if you're even 2-hit KOing it. Like you probably aren't.
I have no idea.
Anyway, just thinking out loud there. Next team on the ladder is Kyogre, Yveltal, Mawile, Tapu Lele, Kartana, and Gothitelle.
I am amazed by the fact that someone not only thinks Mawile is a Pokemon, but also thinks Gothitelle is a Pokemon.
And in the year 2019. It's safe to approach matchups with Yveltal as your only Groudon check.
That too. Man, yeah.
Yeah, Gothma, I mean, I don't know. We've seen, I think Gothitelle and Mawile have been officially revealed to be in Sword and Shield, correct?
I don't know. I haven't followed that
I think
super
they've
closely.
both been in the trailer. Yeah, I'm pretty sure they have. Yeah, I'm pretty sure they have. Gothitelle will probably be good in that. So, if you like Gothma, wait a week, and then you can revisit
Well,
that.
not Mawile. Mawile's done.
Well, Mega Mawile is done. If you want to use regular Mawile.
Why would you ever... Okay, move on.
Gothma fans of the world. The next team on the ladder is Groudon, Lunala, Salamence, Tapu Fini, Incineroar, and Jumpluff. And I think, Jake, you said this was Gavin playing it on his main.
Yeah, on the King of Mars account. I think, I mentioned a few minutes ago, like playing is this an Yveltal matchup game? And I guess Gavin decided that Jumpluff is his Yveltal matchup.
Sleep Powder is the Yveltal matchup.
Yeah.
And he got rid of the Snorlax that was on it. Which slot was that, in the Fini slot?
I don't remember. Probably, yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure.
I would think, maybe not. It could be in the Incineroar. I don't know. Anyway, next team on the ladder is Ho, Kyogre, Gengar, Tapu Koko, Incineroar, and Persian. Now, is that a Alolan Persian, Jake, or is that regular Persian?
Yes, sorry. That is Alolan.
I was... Oh, regular Persian. Somebody's getting excited about Long Cat Meowth coming up in the next game. I'm sorry, I'm talking a lot about Sword Shield. I'm pretty excited about that.
Long Cat.
Long Cat. He tall.
Disgusting.
He tall. The next team on the ladder here is well documented: Xerneas, Lunala, Lucario, Tapu Lele, Incineroar, Amoonguss, which is definitely not the most popular Xerneas Lunala variant, but we'll touch on that as we go through.
It used to be, but I think it kind of progressed past there.
Yes, I think it did. The next team here is Groudon, Yveltal, Metagross, Tapu Koko, Incineroar, and Venusaur. That one's pretty familiar at this point.
Yep. And then finally, that brings us to Rayquaza, Necrozma, Duskmane, Tapu Koko, Tapu Fini, Incineroar, and Suicune. The double fat water type kind of...
Fini and Suicune.
Yeah, it kind of strikes me as like a do-nothing team if you're using both Fini and Suicune, but I don't know. I would imagine you would never bring them to the same game.
Yeah, but what... Is it just for Roar?
Tailwind?
Snarl? Okay, I guess there are niches, but
yeah.
I don't know. Okay. Anyway, it did well on the ladder. Like, it's a cool restricted pairing.
Yeah.
I haven't seen the 6 before. Cool. Okay. So we'll touch on the majors here. I know we've alluded to it a couple times, but first, we've got the Richmond Regional, which is kind of steeped in controversy at the moment because nobody knows whether or not Top 32 is getting CP. Apparently, they have not been given CP, and there's like a campaign to get CP. So I guess we'll find out within the next couple of weeks whenever all those tickets clear. But obviously, the winner of the tournament was a quote unquote invader. Although I'm told that Nils also has ties to New Hampshire.
I'm pretty sure he's a citizen. That's what I've been.
Yeah, that's
hearing.
Interesting. I actually didn't know that. But if he's going to be in New Hampshire, he's going to be at my locals, which is a little bit scary. If he spends any amount of time to see him show up to MIT would be like something else.
Yeah.
But he did win with that Necrozma, Dawnwings, Groudon, Tapu Lele, Incineroar, Excelgor, and Stakataka. Excelgor obviously being kind of like the notable Pokemon there.
Right, and it's pretty cool because it outspeeds like literally everything after, well, even before Unburden. It's one of the fastest Pokemon in the game, and after Unburden, it's still going to be faster than everything. In Tailwind, it's going to beat out like boosted Xerneas. Anything holding a Scarf, it's just monstrously fast and has a lot of cool options. Final Gambit, Struggle Bug, Acid Spray. It combos really well with
I think those were the three moves that Nils was using, right? Were those three?
Yeah.
But it also gets like Encore, Water Shuriken.
Spikes.
If you're really into, boosting your Palisand. So yeah, it's kind of a cool Pokemon that you kind of wonder, in hindsight, given that we're at the end of the format, why you wouldn't have seen it next to things like Lunala or, even Xerneas because of how well it supports special attackers.
Right, definitely.
But anyway, he kind of like tore through the tournament here. So have fun playing against that on the ladder. I swear, Final Gambit mind games are like some of the worst things, and then you have to start creeping Excelgor's HP number and like, dear God. Anyway, the second place person who was deprived of his 7th regional narrowly, which would have brought him into like the most regional wins ever, was Paul, who's also using Necrozma, but the Duskmane version alongside Salamence, Tapu Lele, Jumpluff, and Stakataka. So kind of similar compositions. They both kind of have like that like meme double your speed, sort of like a Noyer, and then Lele psychic offense with Groudon. So you can kind of see like the values in team building were somewhat similar.
I heard that Paul's Necrozma was Dark Pulse, and I'm not entirely sure that's a correct rumor, but if it is, it kind of begs the question: why aren't you just using Dawnwings and using Moongeist Speed?
It was Photon Geyser Earth powered Dark Pulse.
That's what I've heard. I am not entirely sure, but I heard like Dark Pulse Necrozma being thrown around, I think in Monarchs, and I don't know. Like, I guess if you just really want a Steel type, but you have Stakataka, so I'm failing to see why you would ever run Dark Pulse and not just use Dawnwings. But
he has a team report out. Jake, you take the rest of the episode. I'm going to go read Paul's team report.
Oh my God. Anyway,
at third at this tournament was James Evans, who's using kind of his like trademarked version of Kangtorn that features Hitmontop and Amoonguss. Hitmontop most notably being over the Incineroar there. So kind of an interesting edge in the mirror, and obviously, the benefits of fighting types are pretty well documented now, especially with Kangaskhan being a real Pokemon and 2 Stakatakas in the finals, so there you go.
Yeah.
And then Wolf was at 4th with Groudon, Xerneas, Salamence, Incineroar, Smeargle, and Ditto. So very similar to his Farfetch'd team, but sans Farfetch'd, unfortunately.
The spiritual successor to Farfetch'd.
what was it? Smeargle is the spiritual successor to Farfetch'd?
I think so, yeah.
Is that the slot that it was in? Yeah.
Yeah.
And then as we round out top 8 here, Cedric, who is our CP leader right now, and comfortably at this point, I think he's got like a 100-point lead on Jeremy Odena as he continues to kind of like tear through late Ultra here. He's going to get a travel award, but he finished 5th here with Kyogre, Gengar, Tapu Koko, Incineroar, and Celesteela, which is very similar to a lot of the stuff that he's been running in the early part of the season, with like a heavy Perish element. Joe UX9 at 6th. He's also secured his invite, I believe, using that Venusaur team that is absolutely bananas to try and play. I hate Venusaur. Just like, get it off my screen. There are like 3 or 4 in top 16 here that got CP.
Yeah.
At 7th is Jeremy Odena, who continues his early tour of late Ultra Series as he's racked up his invite. He's 2nd in CP, and he's using his trademark team. So a lot of these players here in top 8 are just kind of going back to what's worked for them. And of course, his team is Ray Ogre, Tapu Fini, Incineroar, Togedemaru, and Stakataka. And then rounding out the top 8 is George Tipperman, who is using Groudon, Necrozma, Duskmane, Salamence, Tapu Lele, Umbreon, and Venusaur. So very similar to Hiroshi's team, but with Venusaur over Kangaskhan. And I think you could put a lot of things over the Kangaskhan there.
Most likely, yeah. The Salamence seems more important. It was interesting, like you mentioned, there were a few people that, I guess 3 in a row, and the first 3 you mentioned in top 8, that were all using their kind of patented teams. And so, we're getting kind of late.
We could say it's even 4. I think that has been what Wolf's using for quite a while, too. So James, Wolf, Cedric, Joe, and Jeremy. Is that 5? 5. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, so not only are they just kind of falling back to old things that, have worked throughout Ultra Series so far, but they're still working. So, clearly a good decision.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we sort of discussed it in when we were talking to Blake about Post Worlds. But in a sense, like when there's minimal amounts of time left, and when people don't know what to expect out of like either a dying or changing meta, why not just fall back on what's safe? Like,
exactly.
You've got all this stuff that you're comfortable playing.
Yeah.
But to touch on a couple of highlights that's rounding out top 16 here, there is one more Venusaur, so a total of 3 Venusaur in the top 16. We talked a little bit about the new standard Xerneas Lunala, which seems like what Zach Carlson has there in 9th place, which is Xerneas Lunala, Kangaskhan, Incineroar, Smeargle, and Crobat. And I believe Joey was also running the same thing, and he's kind of like, leading the charge as far as XL meta development as we go here.
Yeah. And then
our favorite team in the format at 12.
Oh, gosh.
Keith will not let the Mawile Como version of
no.
Kangtorn die, and we have to keep hearing about it. And
then there's a really cool team at 15th with one of my favorite megas, Gardevoir. It's weird to think that Mega Gardevoir was a win away from cutting a regional in 2019, but hey, I'm not going to complain.
Here, I don't understand what's going on there in the slightest, but
yeah.
I looked at it when we were talking about it earlier, and I was trying to figure out like what exactly it does that something else couldn't, and I came up with nothing. So that's rounding out what's going on here in the Richmond regionals. And again, stay tuned for top 32 CP if you're looking out for that. It seems likely that if enough tickets were submitted, we'll see some sort of resolution. It's
same
or
thing.
revolution. And then the other major that we had was the Paris special event that occurred this past weekend.
Yeah.
It was won by Calvonix, who was using Xerneas Kyogre with Kangtorn, Incineroar, and Moongus. I think, is that the version that Stephen Mia was running at Worlds? Is that like the standard version of it?
I think so.
I think it is, right? And then James's version was just Kartana over Kang, right?
Right.
Gotcha. Another Necrozma at number 2. This team, I believe, is Paul 6, which is... no, it's a different Necrozma, so there you go. Maybe that answers our question. Groudon, Necrozma, Dawnwing, so there's your Moongeist Beam. Salamence, Tapu Lele, Stakataka, and Jumpluff.
Yep. In 3rd place was another version of just standard Kangtorn at this point with Incineroar Moongus. That was followed by Eric Rios using the kind of standard Zerndon Parish team that was really popular like this summer. Kind of fell off a little bit, but it's actually in cut here twice.
Yeah, Alex has it at 8th, right?
Yeah, top 4 with Eric and top 8 with Alex. Again, those two using the same teams in their tournaments and both doing well. It's kind of a theme between the two of them now.
Yep. At 5th place, as we go through the rest of top 8 here, was let me just scratch my eyes for a minute. Groudon, Mewtwo, Manectric, Lele, Whimsicott, and Jinx. Yes, that was undefeated in Swiss.
Yeah.
I mean, Mewtwo Lele is scary. I just don't understand what else is going on there. I guess. The 6th place team looks like the a Gotti version of XL with Kangaskhan, Ditto, Tapu Koko, and Incineroar. And then at 7th is it's that team that's been going around, but with Tornadus over, weirdly enough, Rabombi. Rabombi has been replaced by Tornadus.
Yeah.
So it has the Kyogre, the Lunala, the Lucario, Tapu Koko, Tapu Lele, and Tornadus. So rip to the B.
Yeah. Rip to the B, but Tornadus is probably a little bit more reliable than Rabombi,
Probably.
I
I would hope.
Yeah. Then again, Alex Gomez rounding out top 8 with Zerdon Parrish.
Mm-hmm.
Some other kind of interesting stuff throughout top 16 and 32 in this regional, but nothing as crazy as Gardevoir Ho-Oh. We did have, oh gosh, I'm blanking on his username, but Hippolyte, who won
Red Silver, I think.
Red Silver, yeah, that's it, with that Shedinja team. So kind of surprised, actually, we didn't see more Shedinja here. Like, we know that Europe loves their Shedinja.
Oh, there's one at 10th there, but
yeah, there's 2 in top 16, and then 2 more in top 32. 3 more, sorry, in top 32.
There's a couple hanging around.
Yeah, there's also a Pachirisu, which...
Oh, I thought that died.
I mean, sure. I mean, it's not on Kangtorn. It's on... Well, it is on Kangtorn, but it's Ogre instead of Groudon.
Interesting.
And then Mega Mewtwo Mandibuzz.
Sure.
Autono Rabombi.
Okay, Europe. I see an Excadrill. I don't know. There's some cool stuff there. There's also Dialga Yveltal that's there in top 16.
True.
Albert has a reputation for running stuff that's a little bit, we'll say, off meta. But yeah, so yeah, the top 8 there, like a pretty standard, relatively standard assortment of teams, I would say. Stuff that, aside from Jinx, we've seen do well over the course of the format, and then it sort of evolves from there, we'll say, as you go through the rest of top 32.
Yeah, well, I believe that wraps it up for half number 1 of our podcast. We'll be back with a really cool discussion about journalism and the surrounding topics with author Jason Krell, who you've all known and read some of his articles before, I'm sure. So stick around. It's a really cool discussion we had with him. And
you'll also get to hear me magically heal from my cold over the next couple seconds, which is really exciting.
Yes, this definitely wasn't recorded 6 days after we recorded with Jason.
So if you're into medical marvels, stay tuned. Welcome back, content consumers. We are here with Jason Krell again. My name is Brendan Lewis. I'm joined by Major Bowman, Jake Muller, as usual, and of course, just to go over our internet names, I'm Mr. BDog46, and we are joined by Duelist X, who is our guest this week, and I'm gonna hand off to Jake just briefly, as he tends to do our introductions here. I don't want to step on his only thing that he really has going for him right now.
This is my entire life, is these little 30-second introductions. The Jason is he's been around for a few years now. I know he kind of got into the scene in like 2015, 16. So an Arizona player, went to all their locals when they had them. RIP. Phoenix also regionals. But no, he's been around for a long time. He's done some commentary. He does a lot of writing. And that writing aspect is why we had him on today, because we did want to talk about journalism and its place in the VGC community and elsewhere in video games.
So yeah, welcome to the show, Jason.
Thank you so much. And can I just say, before we even get to the journalism, I'm so flattered to have ever be referred to by like my game name, because I came to VGC after Nugget Bridge was kind of like in decline, so I never was like known as Duelist X. I was always just like Krell, and like that's but like I still respect you guys using it, because even though no one would like recognize it or know it, it still is what that's like my usual online handle. So I appreciate that.
Well, now it's out there a little bit more, so maybe you'll get it a little bit more.
That'll work.
So we have some talking points prepared, but I thought that the day that we're recording here is kind of interesting in the sense that the demise of Kotaku is nigh.
Well, it is not necessarily the demise. It is there is a whole thing with that whole the Geo Media Group And it seems like Deadspin, at least, which is their like sports sister
right,
site,
right.
that one seems dead. Like today, like 5 or 6 journalists
rough.
quit in solidarity with their editor who was fired. And Kotaku just kind of, no one's really sure what's going to happen because the union is taking a stand against what happened. So like I don't know, I haven't talked to these people, but like there could be a strike. They could also quit in solidarity. It's really unclear, but at the very least, the future of the site is uncertain.
First of all, Deadspin being gone is upsetting. I love Deadspin. It's like very modern and can be hard hitting at times, which is kind of a nice change from some of the other outlets that I usually consume sports content from. But anyway, I just thought it was kind of interesting, given that the day that we're having you on recording this right now coincided with the day that Kotaku has ongoings.
We all know that Kotaku is a very beloved site within our circles. So.
Well, and what's ironic, especially though, especially with VGC players who don't like Kotaku, is that part of me thinks they forget that, like, aside from I think one article about Worlds, I'm the only one who's ever really written anything about VGC for the site. So I mean, I don't know. I've always thought it was interesting. I don't take a lot of what they say personally, but like when I see people saying like, oh, VGC has been done wrong by Kotaku, like it very much feels like that means that I have done wrong. And I mean, that's obviously one of the things I guess we're here to talk about, but yes, I do know that it is not the most beloved site, but I do think that they do a lot of good stuff. And I think a lot of it comes from misunderstanding about the way journalism works, and that's also, I think, a thing that we'll talk about today.
Right.
Yeah, so I think that's actually one of the first things that we want to just get into. And I know that there was kind of like a recent discussion, at least on Twitter. We'll put discussion in air quotes here. But that a lot of like the ethics of certain things that some of these websites do, or some of the larger like journalism websites do, were kind of brought into question by some members of the community. So are there, I don't know, like any sort of basic tenets or any sort of like general overview that you can give us as far as like journalism ethics and some of the things that maybe some of the more topical aspects of it as well?
Like what's the Hippocratic Oath of journalism?
Well, actually, I'm glad you asked, because there is something called the SPJ Code of Ethics. That's the Society of Professional Journalists. And so another thing just to clear up, because I don't think a lot of people, maybe a lot of people don't know, I'm currently in a master's program studying sports journalism, and this was like something we learned starting day one. I had a whole class devoted to ethics and learning, how to apply these 4 rules. Well, not rules, but guidelines. So the first major, and they all kind of encompass larger things, but there's boiled down to these 4 main points. The first one is called seek truth and report it. That seems pretty straightforward. That's the ultimate goal of journalism. The second one is to minimize harm. Obviously, sometimes you may harm people when you are reporting the truth, because the truth is paramount to what you're doing. But you always want to do as little harm as possible, ideally not to innocent people. I mean, obviously, a lot of journalism is holding people accountable. So it's not so bad if you harm some big company that's abusing people, but you don't want to harm someone, just some random person, not a public figure, things like that. The third tenet is act independently, which basically is kind of what this is going on with Deadspin and Kotaku is about, and that is basically that no one dictates your coverage except the journalists themselves. So like the problem right now is that management was telling Deadspin how they should, what they should write about and what they can't write about. And that can create all kinds of conflicts of interest. It can damage the trust that people put in journalists to tell the truth. So that's why that's so important, and that's why they're fighting so hard over this. And then the last one is be transparent and accountable, which is basically just to talk about the process, how you went about reporting, be quick to own up to mistakes, make changes, stuff like that, and don't try to hide things. That's like one of the reasons why when sites make mistakes, they don't take down the story, or they shouldn't take down the story. They update it, even if it might be damaging. There needs to be that public record that yes, we made a mistake, and then here's what the steps we took to finish it. And I guess, when talking about what happened with my Polygon article, and I guess probably also the Zoe article, we'll probably talk about that too, I'm sure. Like, that's part of what I think this is hopefully me being transparent and accountable and talking about what happened with those stories. So that's, right. So those are the 4 points of ethics.
Yeah, so those obviously make a ton of sense and apply to the wider journalistic world, as it is. But given that we're esports journalism specifically, which is obviously the area that you focus most into, is not necessarily uncharted territory per se, given that esports has been around for a couple of years now, but it still is kind of growing, and coverages of certain things are always kind of changing in a way that some of the sports and general news coverages are not, in the sense that it's very linked to online communities and things like that. So do you find or are there any sort of like ethical pieces or any sort of additional practices that are kind of enforced as it applies only to esports journalism?
Well, what I would say about ethics and esports journalism is not that there are additional considerations, because honestly, we've studied this I actually took 2 ethics classes, or at least 2 classes that dealt with ethics, and really, like, pretty much any situation you can get in falls under one of those 4 things. Mm-hmm. But what I have noticed in esports journalism is that because the people who are writing these stories and this content, because a lot of it, being frank, is not what you would think of as traditional journalism, which is more like reporting. It's a lot more, like hot takes or personal opinions or analysis, which is like, can be journalism, but isn't always. It's kind of a weird fine line. But what I'm finding is that this understanding of ethics is not there, or not there as much as it should be. And even myself, before going into this master's program, I did not have as clear an understanding as ethics as I do now. And the reason that these people lack the understanding is because there is not a lot of money in esports journalism. And so people who have more training and have degrees and have experience are not going to go write for a website where they're getting paid $20, $30 an article. Like, that's just not something they can do and like live off of. Mm-hmm. And so they get young writers, hopeful writers who are willing to work hard for little pay, often in college or coming just out of college, or even just volunteering. And yeah, maybe they're in like a journalism program, or maybe they're just like fans who like know how to write fairly well, or maybe they're not either of those things, and they're just someone who wanted to do it, and they don't get this ethical training. And where it ends up being okay is because a lot of the time they're not really dealing with big ethical dilemmas. Like, they're not talking to people, they're not talking about people. And that's really like in the process of reporting, that is when you need to use your code of ethics. If you're talking about someone someone picked a hero in League of Legends that you maybe like disagree with, like that, you're not really going to need to, like, worst case, maybe that's minimize harm. Like, you don't want to lay into them too much, and you want to treat them fairly. But like, usually you're not really using it. But the problem is when they do kind of wade into these waters, where they do start to do what's seen as more traditional journalism, they don't have these same tools. And yeah, they're not always going to make that mistake. But when they do, or they do get into a hard situation, they're not as sure what to do in the moment. And then they're kind of blindsided when there's backlash to it. And then they don't know how to respond after, because the response is just as important as, to a mistake is just as important as making it in the first place.
Right. So I guess my question in that sense, having heard that, point about kind of lack of experience, is that, even if the article, the writers themselves don't necessarily have the training or the experience or the knowledge about some of these like ethics or standards or codes or whatever, how do some of the articles that have ended up being pretty controversial, and not just in VGC, but across the wider esports community, make it past editing on some of these sites that have kind of generated a bit of a name for themselves?
Well, I think it boils down to a choice, oftentimes, in a lot of ways, especially for the bigger sites that do have more money. Like, there's always a choice. Just these are guidelines. They're not like hard fast rules. Sometimes you may have an ethical reason. You may determine that like it's okay to kind of go against one of these guidelines or this code of ethics if the situation calls for it, or you may like realize that like, you're not really causing enough harm to warrant stopping, like killing the story. So, there are these ethical discussions in occasion on these larger sites. But the other problem is the nature of journalism today has changed. So like in the past, and I worked at a print outlet in college. It was my university, but it was run exactly like a professional print journalism. We were a daily paper, and the process there is reporters write the story, they get it in by a certain time, then it goes to the copy desk, and the copy desk's sole goal is to edit the story. 2 people edit the story for grammar, syntax. They look for potential flags like this. Then it goes to the copy chief, who reads the story again and kind of looks maybe more for these ethical issues and bigger structural problems. Then it gets put on the page by the designer, and the editor-in-chief and the copy editor go over everything again. So that's like 3 or 4 layers of editing, because at the end of the day, you just have to put out the paper by midnight or 1. Like that's when you send it off to the printers. But in new media, where everything is so online, the timeline is hyper accelerated. You want to get your story up as soon as possible because there are a million more. And also financially, because ad revenue has changed so much due to websites like Google and Facebook eating up all of the good ad revenue, that news sites can't rely on that anymore. So they just have to go for volume. So it's changed the way that they approach these things. And there's not as much time for conversations about ethics as there was before. So that's one problem straight up. And then at smaller sites, editors they don't necessarily have any more training. I mean, I can't tell you how many articles I've read at these very small sites. Well, not necessarily very small, but like clearly a step below like a multi-million-dollar company like Geo Media. Right. But how many stories I've read that like don't even have basic editing for like grammar or spelling or any of that stuff. Like maybe they get a quick glance, or the writer is like fairly competent and doesn't have any problems. But like, I can't tell you, like, there's rarely a story where I don't find at least one thing wrong. And when even that like basic level stuff is slipping through the cracks, like I'm highly skeptical that there are conversations about ethics. And really, like, it's kind of like what you said. It's not all on the writer. It is like, that's what editors should be there for, to protect, especially their young writers, from making these missteps. Like that's part of the job of being an editor. But also, editors are expensive. They require a lot of training. Especially those smaller sites, don't even want to hire them. I was working for Upcomer, an esports site, as an editor. Made it 3 months before they let me go, and kept on some writers who had then no editors to oversee them. So like clearly the priority is not on enabling editors to like nurture and protect the writers from, into being better journalists, into getting and avoiding trouble,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So kind of before that whole process, it goes from the writer off to the editors and to whoever else and whoever publishes it. But like the very, very beginning, when the writer is thinking, I want to write something about this event or this topic or something, what makes for that like event or topic that makes that like an actual good story? Because like in theory, you could write about anything, I guess, if you really wanted to, but like there's only going to be so many different kinds of things, or like special events, or like these random one-off occurrences that actually warrant a story that people are going to click on and read. So right. I guess to make it more specific, like I think one of the issues that was raised on Twitter during the latest journalism conversation, quote unquote, was that like some of these stories are like sensationalizing these random events and not covering like the actual news. But like, is Wolf running like a 19th regional like actually news anymore, or are these like smaller things that don't happen very often? Like, are those the only things that people really care about or care enough about to like read?
So this is definitely like, that is, considering these things, it's like that's step one, before you even write anything. And just to be clear for anyone who's listening, that is called finding the angle for the story. Like there are a bunch of different ways to tell the story of any given event. And so the first thing a journalist does is they find their angle. Now, the first thing you have to do when you're figuring out your angle is consider your audience. And this is something that I think especially I've noticed in the VGC community that there's no understanding of audience. So when someone is writing, and this is me as someone who's written for Kotaku, Polygon, like big sites with a wide general gaming audience, to places like Trainer Tower, or when I was doing the Saffron City Post for like that 6 months, like that's to a very core VGC audience. So if I'm writing to a VGC audience, I can absolutely just talk about Wolf winning his 19th regional and what an accomplishment that is, or talking about, a particular Pokemon got a lot of CP for the first time, and things like that. But if I'm writing to a general audience, the thing that I think VGC players don't understand is nobody outside VGC cares about VGC like inherently. They just right. they don't care at all. And what they care about is Pokemon.
I totally agree.
They care about Pokemon maybe. And that's what gets them in. Or they care about general human interest stories. So, using the example of the car crash, because that's what we're talking about here, the thing about the regional was not that Kyle won his first regional. It was not that Kyle won his first regional against his like one of his best friends, who's, well, I don't know, I guess like maybe since like I'm getting considering ethics, like I don't want to name this person because like that was kind of like the issue in the first place. So
right.
It was not against people know. So like I'm not avoiding it because I'm afraid to say it or anything. I'm just trying to respect that person. The same way I tried to make up for that when I didn't in the article originally. So it's not Kyle winning his first regional. It's not Kyle winning against his friend. It's not winning against his friend who he drove there with. It was Kyle winning the regional after getting into a very traumatic event, which is a car accident, not getting any sleep, and then ending up in the finals against a person who was in the same situation as him. And to me, that's a story of, obviously there's trauma involved, but it's a story of incredible resilience. It's a human interest story. I mean, it is incredibly difficult to win a Pokemon event as it is, but to be able to do it after going through that kind of an experience, I think is extremely compelling. And I mean, it's not inspiring in the sense that like you're going to inspire somebody to go out there and go try to repeat that same process, but it's inspiring in the sense that like this is an incredible player. Like he was able to overcome all this adversity, and that I think is a good story. It is a newsworthy story. That's a term we use, is newsworthiness. Does not happen often, and it's interesting and it's worth telling. And yes, you have to handle it delicately because these people did go through a trauma. But that's why once you figure out the angle, then you address like, okay, how do I handle this delicately? And so in this case, what I tried to do was to not talk about the crash itself very much, which if you'll notice, that's like the lead. Yes. Like the headline focuses that because again, and we'll go kind of probably get back to headlines, but like the story, the angle of this story is the car crash and then the winning. The two are kind of inextricably linked. So that has to be in the headline. Then it has to be in the lead because that's the first thing that you read, and that has to tell them exactly what the story is going to be about. And then it's also in what we call the nut paragraph, which is that's like where the meat of the story is. Like if you read the lead and the second paragraph, that should tell you everything pretty much you need to know about the story or the important details, and then everything else is kind of supplementary.
Right.
So it's involved in there, and then the rest of the story is about the tournament because that is just kind of the way that we convince someone who doesn't care about VGC to read about VGC. So if I was writing that same story for somebody else, would not have needed to go with that angle. I might have still, because I do think it's newsworthy, but I could not have written that story and ignored the whole car crash aspect and written that for a website like Polygon or like I said, pretty much anywhere.
I think like the concept of clickbaiting has kind of gotten a bad reputation, but also it's like a bit of a necessity, and it's like also literally the point of a headline. Like it's supposed to grab you and want you to read more, or like for, I guess if you're clickbaiting a video, like watch more or something, but like that's the goal. Like, I don't like, I fully, like, I get what you're saying, and I'm kind of just piggybacking off of like the like the original hook part, because it like the concept of shaming someone or like an outlet or an author or whoever for like trying to get people to consume the product they've created seems weird to me because like why else would they have made it if they didn't want people to see it? And I think
it's not even like getting about like consuming a product. It's just like telling a story. I guess it's like that almost makes it sound like more capitalistic than it is. Like I don't
I know what you mean.
Yeah, right. Like, so like, it's just, I wanted to share this story because I think it's an interesting story and it's remarkable. And yeah, like the goal, and I have the headline now in front of me. It was Pokemon player totals car in a crash, wins tournament anyway. That is literally what happened.
Yeah,
that is
that's
just
the story.
That is the sequence of events that happened. If that's clickbait, I don't know what else, like, I don't know how else you write that story, like that headline. And still like communicate what this story is about, you know.
Even if it is clickbait, like, is that bad?
Right.
Like, is clickbait in general a bad thing?
There are situations where it is bad. I'll give you an example: the Zoe story.
That was going to be my next topic. Yeah.
Yeah, the original headline for that story was like, "Woman wins." I don't remember because we changed it. Like, I talked to my editor and got it changed, but it was originally like, "Woman wins," like. Woman is first to win, like, or so-and-so, or it was like player. No, we changed it to player becomes first woman to win regional, but it was like very focused on their gender, and like not as focused on the accomplishment. And it was very much like, oh look, a woman won an esport. Isn't that novel? And and when that happened, and another thing to consider is I do have a part in picking headlines, but usually that's done by the editor. They often run it by us to make sure it's okay. That Zoe story I think was also written a few years ago now, like it was 2017. Yeah, so it was like 2 years ago now, and almost 3. But so, like, obviously I've learned a lot since then, and I did originally, like, sign off on that, but when it went up and I saw it more, and I started people talking about it, immediately recognized, that is not an okay headline. That was clickbaity, that was maybe, you could say, exploitative. I reached out to my editor, I voiced the community's concerns, I said that I think that we could change it to this, to maybe take the focus off of the gender and more about the accomplishment. And I think within a few hours we changed the headline to player becomes first woman to win international, Pokemon tournament or something like that.
Because I feel like that's a good story. Like in an age like now where like gender equality and women's rights are such an important topic, like someone becoming the first woman to win this major event in our sport is like, it's cool. Like, there's a lot of women that I think are, I mean, probably rightfully so, like, not turned away, but like discouraged from joining our community because of, the bad reputation that video game players have for sexism and misogyny and that kind of thing. And like, I'm not going to say that's not the case within VGC. I personally like to think we're pretty welcoming, but I know that there have been multiple cases where, some people have felt differently, and rightfully so. I'm not trying to suppress any of that, but the point is that like that is an accomplishment, and that is like really cool. Like, we have a female that has won major tournaments, and obviously Zoe's not the only one either. Like, Trista's won regionals before, and
of course,
and like I think like shining light on the fact that there are avenues for a more diverse crowd to play our game is really cool. But I think the main issue with that article is, I think, though, like, woman comes out of nowhere headline. And,
that's what it was. Of course, how could I forget? That's the meme, right?
Yeah,
this woman comes out of nowhere. And the other thing I think to consider was, like, once again, I think people are fixating on the headline without reading the article. If you go back and read that article, her gender is mentioned once in the whole thing, and then never again. And there were maybe some other problems with that article. I know that I learned that there was, I tried to frame it as she was the first to win an international event. Yeah. I learned later, I think, that there was a player who won, I think it was a German nationals, and it was technically international because obviously like European regionals, you'd have people coming from different countries. So there was maybe some like question about the validity even of the statement. And it was also like the first international. It was like it was the second international ever. So like maybe not necessarily like that was the big, it wasn't like there was a long history of women not winning it. I probably could have done more to mention the other women who have found success in VGC. So like there's always things that get done wrong, but I think that people are really quick to jump on the bandwagon and get upset at a thing. And then it's okay to be upset and it's okay to voice your problem, but then to like continue it or to not pay attention when people go to efforts to fix it. It's, you know, it's like it's hurtful for me just as a person doing this because I want to share these stories for the community to see the kind of conversations that I see. Now, does wanting to share stories of the community excuse me from doing, you know, what like a legitimately bad job of doing that? Absolutely not. It's not a free pass. Yeah. But I don't often agree that I did do a bad job in a lot of these places. Definitely made mistakes, definitely always can improve, but I think that it paints an unfair picture of me to, you know, say that I am a bad journalist, to especially today. You know, maybe in the past, like, you know, I wasn't quite as good, but especially today, I think that that's not a fair characterization.
Do you think some of that has to do with some, like, I don't really know if there's a term for this, but some kind of like outsider factor? And I'm not talking about you specifically. I'm talking about like the places these sites are published. So like Kotaku and Polygon are the two sites we've mentioned. Those aren't VGC sites. They're more like very general journalism sites, more focused on esports and that kind of thing a lot of time. But do you think that the fact that they're posted there and not on like a community site like a Nugget Bridge or a Trainer Tower might have something to do with it? Because, you know, these sites are kind of known to have a reputation to not be the most accurate or like concerned about VGC in general.
I feel like that goes back to what Jason was saying about like the audience that you've selected.
Yeah.
Know, where like, you know, and we talk about this sometimes, Jake, when as it pertains to like casting, where it's like, okay, like, you know, some of the things we say might not appeal to you as a listener, but like there are also other people listening to
right, like explaining some mechanics that, you know, might be common knowledge for like the elites, but not some other people that tuning in or something like that.
Yeah, so I definitely think that that's a component. But I also think that, like, obviously with the Zoe situation, like treating gender fairly is just huge in general because of how much women have had to put up with, like, throughout all of time. So like that's I think understandable in that instance. And I think in the more recent one, I think while the person who I hurt by including their name, even though they're a minor, which I am happy to admit, not happy to admit, but I will freely admit was a mistake, and one that as soon as I realized it, tried to rectify it and did get it rectified. I think that there was also a personal grudge involved, due to, and I didn't, I'll be brief about this because it's not really about journalism, but I think that this player had an incident on Twitter during the MPA when I was the commissioner last year, and we considered disciplinary action for this player, even though the tweet was not necessarily through the MPA. Ultimately, if I recall, we decided not to do anything about it because the team like managers stepped in and kind of talked us down from that. But I also think I listened to what they talked about this incident on a podcast, and I think that there's some misunderstanding about the nature of the punishment. I heard the word banned, you know, that implied that like I tried to get this person banned, and I don't even think that was ever part of the discussion. At most, I think we were talking about a 1-week suspension, so I just wanted to clear that up in hopes of hopefully alleviating anyone's bad feelings toward anybody else. because obviously I don't want anyone to have to be upset at anybody else. But I do think that, that may have created some bad blood, which made that person not happy about anything that I would have done. So I think that's a component. And I actually think that fact played into the reporting process, which led to the mistake in the first place, which that is more about journalism. So, I mean, we can talk about that if you guys want to. But if there's other things too,
So part of, I think Jake had asked whether or not, there was a difference in the way that that articles were like perceived based on, what forum they're posted to. And I guess my question that's a little bit similar to that is whether or not, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, is that like esports journalism in particular is like kind of inextricably linked to online communities, and whether or not kind of like some of the noise or response that's generated by online communities can kind of like affect the way that things are reported or handled.
Yeah, no, I definitely think that when these esports stories, especially about smaller communities like VGC, end up on these larger things, there are immediate concerns that the community is being misrepresented. And it's especially the case when the person doing the reporting is not a member of that community, because generally like they don't know the situation as well. And that's why journalists have what's called a beat, where they embed themselves in the community. They like learn as much as they can about it, stay up to date. Like that's like their job is to know what's going on in that community. But in, these general sites can't afford to assign someone to the VGC beat. So they're not going to be as knowledgeable about it. But what I think people, again, kind of goes back to something I said, is when people criticize the way sites like Kotaku have covered VGC, like that's always been me. And I am somebody that is in the community. And we also have, Eric at the Game House now, like he is a part of this community. I know the story about JMR, his incident at one of the internets, that was not by somebody from the community. And that was not an ethical story, like by far was not an ethical story.
That was wild.
Yeah, that was terrible. I was very as active on Twitter as I could be, condemning that article. I emailed editors at other sites because I think journalists are also supposed to hold each other accountable. So I said, hey, this is a story. If you want to cover it, nobody decided to. But I think that like that's a good example. That story is a good example of what happens when a site, when a writer from a site writes about a community that it doesn't understand, especially at a smaller site that doesn't have the kind of editorial oversight with ethics and all that, versus the stories that I've written, which, yes, like may have problems in certain ways, but do come from a place of understanding of the community. Even if it's incomplete, I wasn't here from day one, but I'd like to think that I have a fairly good, at least in terms of journalism, like I'm probably the journalist that has, like the still working journalist that has the best understanding of the VGC community. Not to make it a competition or anything like that, but it just,
I mean, like, there isn't much of one if there was.
Yeah, well, exactly. Right. So yeah, I think that definitely people understandably are protective of their community when it gets put out in front of a lot of other people. And that's a good thing. And it's important to be diligent, but it's also important to like think about like the human person who's writing this and whether they are a member of your community or not. And maybe like adjust the way you act based on that instead of just treating it the same as you would treat anything else.
Yeah.
So we've talked about it a couple times as it pertains to some of the larger articles, and I think at some point you had said like nobody cares about VGC. So and I don't disagree with that. I think that as a whole, and the way that it's kind of promoted by TPCI and this, that, and the other thing, that most people don't have a reason to care about VGC. So can you like talk a little bit more about how like the esports community at large perceives VGC, and whether or not you're like tapped into that as being a writer for some of those larger sites?
Yeah, so the larger esports community, I mean, even like if we, there's gaming, which encompasses everything, and then the next tier down for a smaller size is esports, and then obviously you have the individual communities. to general esports people, Pokemon is seen as kind of like a novelty or like a cute thing. Like maybe some people will watch it. Like you'll see people, like I want to say it was like, was it Sky Williams or something like that, was like talking to Aaron about like getting into VGC on Twitter next season. Like there are like some people who like Smash players who like have been interested. I know like Esam watches VGC, so like there's some kind of awareness. But like in these major esports, like I know, oh my God, Pastry Time, the caster for League of Legends.
Yeah, I know who that is.
Yeah,
He also,
Yep.
he also loves VGC. But that's it. Most people don't know it exists, don't take it seriously. I mean, there really isn't like, yes, TPCI supports it and they like put on these tournaments for us, but the amount of money invested and the size of the scene is significantly smaller than almost every other esport out there.
I'm going to just interrupt. You know what I found out on Twitter today is that Pokemon is the most valuable franchise of all time, the most valuable media franchise of all time.
Oh, wow. Yeah,
absolutely.
I thought it's like bigger than Marvel, bigger than Harry Potter, like more money than all of those other franchises.
So
which
not
I
even
was
just
interesting.
like spanning all media, not just video games.
Yes.
Right.
That's crazy.
Yeah. But despite that, and that kind of plays into like how people are interested in Pokemon, but like Pokemon to so many people is not competitive and it's not doubles.
Yeah.
And it's not going to tournaments and playing in them. And it's certainly not the people playing like they care about the Pokemon, the characters. But so, people generally also don't care about Pokemon. I have found a few places, who do and who are willing to like give me the opportunity to share some of the stories. That is the editor that is at Kotaku and is now at Polygon. There was an editor at a smaller site that has since ceased operations. Probably, I mean, they just, these sites get closed all the time. They were open to it. And then everywhere else that I've written at or tried to write at has shut me down, regardless of how good I think the story is. I think, and it's always disappointing to me because that's like, that's my first esport. That's where I'm most knowledgeable, where I think I can write the best stuff and offer the most insight. But like, they don't, like sites don't want that coverage. Like they will actively tell me no when I pitch something. And that's upsetting. And even like, there are even times, but the weirdest thing also about that, I guess, like, larger sites being interested in Pokemon specifically, for this car crash story, I didn't even pitch that story. I tweeted about it. Somebody saw it and said, hey, can you write this story for us? That sounds interesting. Which I doubt that's something that a lot of people know. Like, I didn't set out to write this story, even though I thought it was a good one. I was asked to write it. And so, like, but that's really rare. That's never happened to me. And I've been writing about and tweeting about Pokemon for, since 2016, when I got involved. And so, yeah, I think hopefully that answers your question about what esports people think of VGC.
I think you covered a lot of angles of the question that I asked, which was good. It's really, really interesting. I mean, like, it pretty much confirms everything that I thought, outside of those, like, niche Twitter interactions that I think you mentioned, like, the exhaustive history of mainstream esports personalities interacting with VGC players on Twitter. Like, I'm pretty sure that was it.
Yeah, no, it's very limited.
Yeah, so just a quick question about something that you had just mentioned is, at some point you said that, the way that modern online journalism is at this point is that you kind of like, the bigger sites just aim for quantity over, these meticulously edited, articles that go on to paper print and stuff like that. So why wouldn't some of these bigger sites be more willing to take a flyer on, an article about competitive Pokemon, given, the name recognition of the franchise and the general perception? I think, in general, Pokemon is a positively perceived game and franchise. I don't understand, like, why necessarily they wouldn't be willing to just be like, oh, okay, somebody has an already written article about this game, let's just publish it.
Well, for the esports people, there's not enough respect, like, for the integrity of the game itself, is the feeling that I get. Like, people don't respect VGC as a game. They don't think it's like competitive enough. It's not like watched enough. And especially those smaller, like, most esports sites don't have the money to really pay someone to write about that. Like, those are the sites that are not paying super well. The only sites that I think pay fairly well like you have ESPN Esports. They pay obviously great because it's ESPN. They got Disney money. And then you've got like Dot Esports and like a few others that are like of that size. And then everyone else is like Dexerto. But even they, from my understanding, I think, like Freelance Stories is like, $20, maybe more. I don't know the exact numbers. I've never written for Dexerto, but like they definitely are one of the larger of that kind of tier of esports journalism. And they don't have a whole lot of money and aren't looking to pay for a game that like ultimately pulls in like, maybe we get like 20,000 people at Worlds finals, but the rest of the time we're rocking like, like at regionals, like not even 1,000, like on average. Our numbers are terrible, like relative to like many, many other esports. So that's that. Then at the general gaming sites, it's a matter of an inaccessibility. You cannot, the Pokemon, and this is a problem with VGC in general, but the Pokemon that 99% of people experience is the game, single player game, single battles, like going through, getting gym badges, fighting the Elite Four. Mm-hmm. And VGC is so alien to that. Like maybe you get into a couple random double battles or there's one gym that does double battles, but no point in the game ever teaches you how to play VGC. So all the people who engage with Pokemon don't understand it. And like they open it up and it's so counter to their experience that more often than not, they're not like, oh, this is intriguing. They're like, oh, this isn't my Pokemon. And then they'll just not read it, or they like will like leave it very fast. And like, yeah, clicks matter, but there is a thing called bounce rate, which we look at, and like how it's obviously like how long they read the article. And that's definitely something that like people consider when they are picking like an editorial direction. So like it's, we're not hardcore enough for the esports people, but we're too hardcore for the general gaming sites. And that's generally why that doesn't work out.
Okay. That's a good point, because like you kind of touched on this earlier too, but the Pokemon that we play in VGC is so much different than the Pokemon you play in the normal games if you're just so like casually playing through them. But then also it's very different from other esports too. Like most other esports are, I'm trying to think of one that's not, but I think most are all like real time, like either MOBAs or like fighting games. I mean,
VGC's closest to like a card game, like Hearthstone or Magic the Gathering.
Like it's obviously very turn based, and there's not much like constant action. It's these little spurts of actions that happen, and then there's a break, and then there's more action. There's a break, and so it's very different in like structure as a game. And I think the community is also kind of different in structure too, because it's so split between online and in person. Like there are ways to be constantly playing online and ways to be constantly playing in person. And if you don't really want to do one, you don't have to. And that kind of causes not much of a split, because like obviously people still talk in between these different events. But a lot of people that either haven't had the opportunity to go to tournaments or maybe haven't broken through at live tournaments, sometimes are kind of left out of the conversation when we're talking about like VGC and its players and tournaments and stuff too.
Yeah, 100%. I think that definitely exists. And I also think that there's like an age, like not problem, but like I think the age is is one of the things that kind of alienates the community from others.
Don't you know you're playing a children's game?
Well, but like we say that, but if you think about it, like relative to many other esports, because there's not enough, like a lot of money in it, and it is very expensive to play seriously. Most of the older players eventually just kind of stop, and maybe they like engage a little bit, or they like ramp it way down. So the main people who are playing this esport are or like even casually, like not going to tournaments, are like really young people. Right. And like, so the audience skews much younger than I think a lot of esports, and it's like only a difference of a few years. But like having an audience that's like more 16 to 18 than it is like 20 to 23, that's like a huge difference in terms of in just like maturity and like ability to like work toward like creating things in a community. Like, I don't want to discredit any of the work that anyone has done for the Pokemon community as a younger person, or anyone's like contributions, like just talking about the community just because they're young. Like you can be young and still be a good active member of the community, but like it does change the landscape of it. And I think that that's something that is very different. It's a landscape that's very different from a lot of other esports that reach a much wider audience that includes a lot more older people.
All right. Well, very interesting conversations and some really fun stuff we talked about, as well as some more serious stuff. So kind of a new thing for us. We're hitting these,
We pulled back the curtain a little bit.
Yeah. We're not all just fun and games here. We do some heavy hitting here at Soundproof.
Before we move on real quick, because I get the sense that's what's happening, there is one last thing that I did want to clear up in regards to the car crash story, if that's cool.
Yeah, by all means.
So there was talk that, and I don't know where this came from, and wherever it came from, it's fine. Like, I'm not upset about it. But there was also the understanding that there seemed to be this idea that I was going to write the story, even if I didn't talk to anybody. Because that's just what journalists do, right? Like, they'll just go and they'll just write the story anyway. But in reality, if I had not been able to talk to either of them, I would not have been able to write the story. In fact, even after talking to Kyle, we almost didn't run the story because we had to confirm that the car crash even happened. I called 3 different police precincts while I was waiting, while Kyle, I think, was probably sleeping because of how little sleep he'd gotten. But I was waiting I wanted a copy of the incident report so that there was proof that this happened. Not that I doubted him, but that's just your due diligence. Mm-hmm. And so while I was waiting for that, I called 3 different police departments trying to get proof that this happened. And we were going to kill the story if we didn't get that from Kyle, and we did end up getting it, so obviously it ran. But maybe a younger me would have tried to find a way to write the story without talking to anybody, but at least the me I am today would not have done that, because you can't write a story about someone being in a car crash and then winning a tournament without talking to the person who did that. And that goes for most stories. Like, it's not usually good journalism when you don't talk to somebody. Like firsthand talk to somebody. So I just wanted to clear that up. Like, and that's not also an excuse. Like, that I'm not illuminating that fact so that people realize, like, oh, if I don't talk to Jason, he just won't write about the story that, we like that we don't want him to write about. You should write. You want to talk because, and I think Kyle said this on the podcast on Cleaning Scales. He wanted to make sure that I got the story right. That's why I want to talk to him, to make sure that I get the story right too. So It's like, it's a mutual partnership. When journalists are writing stories, we want to talk to you to make sure that we represent what happened accurately. And yes, like maybe in many cases, like some cases, there could be stories where I can't write it if I don't talk to the person who it happened to directly. But as long as I talk to somebody, like I can find, there are other angles, other ways to talk about it. Like in this case, couldn't hear from Kyle's friend, so I went to Kyle. And like that's an example. Like there are always people related to the story that you can talk to. So unfortunately, shutting me out like that, it won't probably work. But I'm also not going to report a story that doesn't actually have people who are knowledgeable of the subject talking to me about it. So just want to clear that up. Now on to the fun stuff.
Okay, so we tend to play a game here if you've listened to the podcast. So we have a game prepared, and just to kind of like caveat this, we are here on Soundproof trying to get rid of the negative connotation of the word clickbait, because it is not inherently a bad thing. It kind of has this like impression in the community that's like, oh, top 10 worst things Jake Muller has ever said in his life, and that doesn't sound so good. But
they've all been in the last hour, by the way, on the
something to like
Nice.
garner clicks is not necessarily a bad thing, and I'm sure Jason will tell you the same thing. So assuming that clickbait is now no longer a term with negative connotation, Jake and I have kind of picked out like a couple of different events that have happened in VGC history, and we would like you, Jason, to write a headline for these events.
Sure.
All right. So the first one, I think, was the one that immediately came to my head. Did you watch the 2016 Worlds? Did you watch that?
Yeah,
event?
yeah, of course. I remember where I was sitting on my grandma's couch in Chicago for her 90-something birthday.
And you were watching Worlds?
Did you?
Yeah.
Did you watch Top 4?
Birthday.
Did you watch
there
Top
was a time
4?
Difference.
The day
yes,
before.
I watched Top 4.
So in Top 4, when Marcus sludge bombed his own Raichu,
right?
This is the event we would like you to clickbait.
To clickbait? Okay, wait. So am I doing this like? Okay. I mean, okay. Am I writing this for what audience? Am I writing this for?
Oh my god.
The wider gaming community.
Okay, sure. I'm writing this for.
You're running it for Polygon.
Kotaku.com. Polygon, sure. God, it would probably be something like Pokemon player possibly throws to friend in top 4 of World Championships.
So that is definitely the angle you would take. Yeah,
I mean, yeah, I think you would have to consider it. I think there's been a lot of discussion about the competitive viability of that option. So yes, that's probably the angle that I would take. Or you could do something like, oops, here's what happens when you sludge bomb your own Raichu. You lose worlds. Mostly I'd love to just start a headline with oops.
With oops.
That would be kind of, that's the kind of headline I would write. Like, whoops.
Ooh, my finger slipped. Okay, how about Pachirisu winning a world championship?
Oh, God, if I'm getting really memey with it, it'd be something like little rodent, little rat Pokemon, not Pikachu, wins Pokemon World Championships.
Small electric mouse that starts with P and ends with U, but is not Pikachu.
Yeah, well, that's a little long. You maybe put that in the sub.
It's too long, Jake. You idiot.
Oh, this is why I'm not a print Arthur. I'm stick to audio.
Even what I said was probably too long. But yeah, something like that. I would want to work in the idea that he did it against a Garchomp. That seems relevant to me as a Pokemon player.
Mm-hmm.
But
everyone knows Garchomp.
Right, everybody knows Garchomp.
Garchomp's one of those Pokemon everybody knows because everybody loves Cynthia.
My mom, exactly. She featured prominently in a Kotaku article.
I think I remember that actually.
She was the image for
photo.
Yeah. I forgot about that.
Yeah. Well, that's another problem. We don't have photographers at events, so we don't have good photos. We have to do stuff like that. But that's another issue.
Can we get Doug on Polygon staff?
Yeah. Oh my God. That'd be great.
Okay, we have one final one, and this is not entirely self-serving at all. I just want to I want to state that before I mention the event. But a certain someone that may or may not be in this call winning the largest online tournament at the time in the form of the Nega Bridge Major in 2015.
Right. So for that, it'd probably be something like.
Keep in mind you have all of the major puns available to you.
Oh, that's true. That's true. There's a lot of major puns because of Major Bowman. But it'd probably be something like Pokemon player wins unofficial tournament that's bigger than most real tournaments or something like that.
Oh yeah, that's a good point.
You'd probably do something like that. Because I remember that Nugget Bridge Major was huge. Yeah, so that's okay. In the article, I would have talked about potentially questionable nature of the competitive integrity due to it being an online tournament. Not to imply.
I also was on staff for that tournament.
Oh yeah, that's also
you could bring that up as well
for sure.
and who was aggressively counter-teaming. Where did he get the information?
Very much so. And I kind of got bailed out in top 4 because my opponent was hella cheating too. So there's plenty of things you could talk about.
Oh, that's right. That was that's
5-move Volcarona.
Oh my god.
Okay, so then it would probably be Pokemon player wins unofficial tournament with major problems.
I feel very attacked.
Yeah, well.
I'm gonna write that up in the It's Always Sunny episode. And I want you to make it your Twitter header, Jake.
Yeah,
I can never replace Old Town Road Kyogre though. I can't.
Oh, okay, that's fair. Yeah, that's a good picture.
Yeah.
Okay, so I believe this brings us to the part of the show where Jason brings us his question. He uses his vast journalism experience to ask us the tough questions now.
Oh, yeah, right. I know. This is the other thing that I wasn't as prepared for as I thought. I wanted to keep it about journalism, but we talked about it a lot. So I guess it's just like, what do you guys think people want out of journalism? Like, do they want? Oh, and this is something I'm gonna go real back to the serious stuff real quick. The other thing that people I think don't understand is that they don't like. Journalism isn't a tool to grow a game. It is telling a story of and like true facts about things that happen. So like, what do you think people want out of like VGC journalism? Do they just want something that's going to advance the cause and not really going to represent things as the way it is? Or do they actually, I don't know. What do they want? Do they want people to know about VGC? Do they not? Is it only under very narrow circumstances? I'm trying to understand.
I think my first thought is just representation. Like VGC, as we've all mentioned, isn't really like a front runner esport, and it's not meant to be, and I don't think it ever will be. But like when the only articles we're getting on these bigger sites usually end up in controversy. Like I think at that point people are just like, well,
occasionally end up in controversy, but
only exclusively everything you write is no. I'm kidding. But no, just the first thought off the top of my head would be like more accurate representation, because these articles don't come out very often, focused on VGC, and I don't know how much of that is warranted or how much of a desire for representation is warranted, just because I'm not sure that we entirely deserve it.
That's a different conversation.
That's a valid,
exactly.
But it's a valid question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that you both touch on like most of the major points that I would have thought of, and I think Jake's is kind of like a little bit more, far-reaching, and then a lot of the points that you mentioned, Jason, kind of like fall under Jake's umbrella. Is that like nobody wants VGC to necessarily be like hidden from the world, but I think that, and it's tough, and we've kind of had this conversation as it pertains to some of the things that we talk about in casting too, is that like some of the things that VGC players would find interesting and think that are like super noteworthy and very interesting obviously don't apply to the wider gaming community. So it's kind of like this tough sort of situation where, some of the things like, a lot of people in our community would read an article about how Wolf won his 19th regional, right? Like that's something that we think is relevant and is like a super noteworthy accomplishment. But if you were to pitch that to the wider community, obviously it's not so interesting. So I think, that sort of thing being appealing to the larger esports or gaming community is what VGC players really want. Like we would love to have an article that talks about, somebody that the community really loves win their first regional. But if the person that, the community really loves is a high schooler that, goes to high school and like, obviously that's not an interesting article. Would it be cool for us to have that representation? Yes. But like we've kind of talked about over the course of this episode here, like it's not newsworthy.
Yeah.
Right. Well, there you go. That's my top tier reporter questioning.
Perfect. All right, that brings us to our very last segment. My favorite. Well, maybe not my favorite, but
it's your favorite. Don't
yeah, it kind of is. Yeah, our guests are cool and all, but I like music a lot better. But our music segment this week, this 2 weeks, this time, this period, this whenever you're listening to this, I recommend that you go listen to an EP by Foster the People called "Pick You Up." It has 4 songs on it. They're all really good. They're 4 most recent songs. Hopefully there's more coming down the pipeline, but it's an EP called "Pick You Up." It's by Foster the People of Pumped Up Kicks fame.
I was gonna say I was under the impression that Pumped Up Kicks is the only Foster the People song.
It is, but there's a few more.
Oh, okay. Well, good to know. I was unaware. Actually, Sit Next to Me is a song that I like. That whole album is pretty.
That's
good,
on that. No, it's not. That's from Sacred Arts Club. Not a good album, I will say.
So I apologize to everybody that's tired of me talking about things that are of and pertaining to punk, but the kick continues. We're going on 4 episodes now where I've just been kind of like spewing punk artists. But anyway, the artist that I'm talking about this week is called Simple Creatures, which is a side project by Mark Hoppus of Blink-182 and Alex Gaskars of All Time Low, which are like, pop punk mainstays, obviously. And they just like got together and made an album. It's called Everything Opposite, and it's like good. It's interesting because it's not really like either of their projects. It kind of like departs. So it gives me a lot to think about.
All right, is it my turn then?
It is.
Go for it.
All right, so this is going to be a real weird one because I tried to think of something more mainstream that I wanted to. Well, it's just out there. So one of the things I did theater in high school, and so I'm going to recommend a musical.
Oh my god,
it's my favorite
so happy.
musical. It is.
I can't wait.
It's the Jekyll and Hyde, the Gothic musical. I think it's incredible. But the problem is, it's very hard to find the actually good version of the soundtrack. We're looking for the one with Anthony Warlow, because there is a version out there that has David Hasselhoff as Jekyll and Hyde, and that's terrible.
I want to listen to that version. I want to hear the Hoff's dulcet tones.
Yeah, so yeah, that is an option, but there's a much better option. It's the Anthony Warlow version. It's great. I feel like it might have been on Spotify, or maybe that was just Spotify pulling it off of my computer. I don't really know. Y'all are free to investigate, but it's a very good album. If you like Sweeney Todd type stuff, it's right up that same alley, like dark, tragic. Very good story.
Fun.
Yeah, so that's
my
what I
roommate
got.
would like that.
Tell him to listen to the podcast. Now it's perfect. Even more reason to.
Yeah, there you go. Everybody listen to Soundproof. So that's going to wrap up our segment here with Jason. Jason, thanks so much for coming on. As Jake mentioned, I think we kind of pulled back the curtain and touched on a lot of things. We got a different perspective, definitely, that some people might not consider when they think about the way that VGC is portrayed in the media. So again, thanks for coming on. If anybody has anything that questions for us or for Jason, feel free to find us on Twitter. All of our handles are there, and Jason's will be obviously in this week's tweet when the episode goes up, so definitely look to that. I'm sure he would welcome your feedback.
Yes, gladly.
As you've, I think, put in Twitter before. I'm sorry, I just volunteered your DMs without asking you first.
I'm happy.
Everyone DM Jason as soon as you listen to this.
Yeah.
All right, so that's going to do it for episode 10 of Soundproof. Thanks so much for listening, and Jake and I will be right back in just a few seconds to wrap it up.
Welcome back, everyone. I had a nice, hour respite from my cold, and now it has unfortunately come back with a vengeance.
In a violent return.
I had a brief time when I was not leaking from various orifices, but now it's back. So F's in the chat. But anyway, thanks for coming by for episode 10 of Soundproof. Jake and I were really happy to have a chance to get to talk to Jason about some of the things that had come up over in the community over the course of the last couple weeks. So now we kind of, hopefully have provided multiple new viewpoints for you to consider when you're approaching some of these things. And, I think, Jason was a really good person to talk to about that. He's in journalism school, can kind of speak from the inside of what's going on there. So we're definitely happy to have him on.
Yep, thanks to Jason for joining us. It was kind of a departure from the strictly competitive discussion about VGC that we've had for most of our episodes, but still a very relevant topic that I think all of us could learn a bit more about. So
definitely
really happy we got to talk about it. Really happy that you guys are sticking around and listening to us. Again, follow us on Twitter at Soundproofcast, or our personal Twitters, Mr. BDog46 and...
Nope.
You have a VGC?
Yeah, it's a VGC. I own the other account, but it's don't follow that one.
Yeah, Mr. BDog46 VGC or Major Bowman _ talk to us. Tell us what you want to hear. Tell us if there's any last things you want us to cover as far as Ultra Series goes. We do have just a couple weeks left of it. We do have a kind of fun end of gen idea that I'm really excited to flesh out and get to you guys. So be looking for that probably in December as Ultra Series comes to a close. But for now, thanks for listening, and we will see y'all next time.
And enjoy Sword and Shield. We won't
talk
to you guys
it's coming out
Sword
soon.
And Shield is
Oh my gosh,
I'm so excited! Go pre-order now, so you can have your keychain plush. And enjoy Sword and Shield, and we'll see you on the flip side when everybody is no longer spoiler free.
Bye.
See ya.